3 days after my boss told me I was not ready for a promotion, he was the one who was not ready to face the chaos I had quietly held back for 7 years. I remember that moment as clearly as if it happened this morning. Some sentences sound harmless, but they open an entirely new chapter of your life. That one, spoken on an ordinary Manhattan morning, did exactly that to me. That day, the city looked like it had been dipped in a thin, silver cold. Not the kind that cuts your skin, but the kind that sharpens your thoughts, the kind that makes you question where you are going, what you are doing, and why you are still here. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, and Hudson Central Medical Center stood there, sleek, expensive, and as emotionally distant as always. The kind of hospital people spend a fortune to get into, only to pray they meet the right human being instead of the right equipment. I walked through the main lobby, and the white lights, always too bright, had their usual way of making all of us look just a little more exhausted than we really were. Quick footsteps, green scrubs are moving in and out. The steady overhead announcements call patients by name. I had worked in this place long enough to know that behind all that order lived hundreds of small disasters ready to ignite at any moment. My name is Olivia Hart, almost 40. Supervisor of patient flow. I decide where patients go, which doctor takes, which shift, and which operating room opens at what hour. I like to joke that if I assign one patient to the wrong case, they might be waiting until midnight, or worse, a surgeon might stare at the board and have absolutely no idea where they are supposed to be. I am good at this job, not because I am smarter than anyone else, but because I pay attention. I remember faces, numbers, which department heads hate, morning meetings, and small things like how Dr. Rodriguez always takes 3 extra minutes every morning to find his reading glasses. Those tiny details stacked together make the entire system run smoothly. And when a system runs smoothly, no one sees the person behind it. They think it runs itself. My personality is simple. I am calm. I hate unnecessary conflict. Sharp enough that people do not underestimate me, but not sharp enough to make them resent me. I am good at systems, not showmanship. I can speak in meetings, but I do not like performing for the board just to earn points. And most importantly, I actually care about patients, especially the elderly. Maybe because I grew up with a nurse for a mother and a grandmother with chronic heart issues. I know what it feels like to lie in an emergency bay, staring at the clock, waiting for someone to notice you. My direct supervisor, Ethan Blake, is the complete opposite. He is the Director of Clinical Operations, a title that sounds impressive, and in some ways, it is. Tall, well-dressed, always looking like he just finished shooting a wellness magazine spread. He speaks well, charming, the kind of man who can make a boardroom nod along even if half of what he says is fluff. But he hates diving into technical details. He avoids data sheets longer than a single page. He believes his presence is a contribution, and above all, he believes he is irreplaceable. I stepped into the meeting that day with a small hope, not the hope of a promotion, just the hope of being acknowledged. I did not want applause. I just wanted one look that said he understood what I had built over the last 7 years. Ethan was not in that mood. He picked up my application packet and flipped through it like someone searching for a Sunday coupon in the newspaper. That kind of careless flipping people do when they already know the ending. I watched his fingers skim past every section without stopping long enough to read, and I knew exactly what was coming. And of course, there it was. Ethan set the file down, fingers laced, posture serene, like he was about to offer guidance to a junior intern. Olivia, you do good work. Very steady work. But the director role requires a higher level of leadership. I do not think you are ready for that. The words did not stab. They landed like a small stone dropped on a wooden table, soft but echoing far. I met his eyes, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. And what exactly are you basing that on? I asked gently, but we both knew the question hit where it hurt. Ethan froze for half a second. Just half a second. But it was enough to expose the discomfort behind his confident mask. Then, like all people who have been in power too long, he pulled himself back upright with borrowed certainty. That is my assessment, based on observation and professional experience. Sure, his professional experience never once included understanding the system I built. I did not argue, not because I lacked things to say, but because I had lived through this brand of evaluation before. I closed my laptop and picked it up with one hand. When I stepped out of that conference room, something in me was crystal clear. Not sadness, not anger, a calm certainty. I knew the board had just shifted, just not in the direction Ethan imagined. And as the glass door closed behind me, I knew that whatever was about to happen next would force him to rethink his definition of the word ready. When that glass door slid shut, it felt like the sound opened a new chapter of my life. One, you have probably stepped into yourself at some point, in your own way. And before I tell you what happened next, where everything starts turning, I want to ask you something small. Where are you listening from? I am always curious if someone in California is sipping coffee and nodding along, or someone in Texas is remembering a meeting from their own past. Leave a comment below, because the stories we think only happen to us often are not as unique as we imagine. And if you enjoy smart, quiet payback, the kind that does not destroy anything, just puts everything back where it belongs, hit subscribe. Because of what happened after that meeting, trust me, you will not want to miss it. Before anyone told me I was not ready, I had saved them so many times, I stopped keeping count. That is not a complaint. It is simply the truth, the same way I know the emergency room rush hours better than the city subway schedule. I was not born in New York. I came from a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where people greet each other by name, and where my mother, a nurse, used to let me sit in the break room during her night shifts. I grew up noticing everything: who worked which shift, which medications she needed, which blood pressure monitor in room 3 always jammed. I had that steady, almost childlike urge to help because I did not know how to say no. Whenever someone asked, I said, "Let me see," and half the task was already done. When I arrived in New York, I thought I was prepared for chaos. Hudson Central Medical Center showed me that chaos came in levels, and theirs was far beyond what I imagined. My first days here felt like being thrown into an orchestra where every musician played a different song. Doctors were double booked, as if it were a daily ritual. There were nights when two surgeons waited for the same operating room because the system assigned the wrong schedule while the patient was already on the gurney. I once watched an 80-year-old man wait almost 3 hours because his chart was sent to the wrong floor. Some mornings, people wasted 20 minutes just asking each other who was actually on duty. Everyone was tired. Everyone was busy. Everyone blamed the system. But no one fixed the system. Sometimes I thought, if endurance could be measured in money, this place would be the wealthiest part of Manhattan. So I did what I had been doing since I was a child. I fixed things. No declarations, no demands for credit, just quiet work. I started by redrawing the entire patient flow. One afternoon, I sat in the break room with a blank sheet of paper and a blue pen, sketching every step and every touch point from the moment a patient walked in to the moment they completed treatment. Then I rebuilt it as a color map. I handed it to the head nurse. She looked at me as if I had solved a math problem the whole department had given up on. Then I created a color-coded coordination board: red for urgent cases, yellow for priority cases, blue for charts fully cleared. With one look, anyone could see exactly where a patient was in the process. Before that, everything was scattered inside TA 12 different Excel files that no one dared open all at once. I optimized the duty schedule, removed the overlapping shifts, balanced the hours so doctors did not have to sprint through the hallways like they were being hunted. I knew each person's quirks. Dr. Turner needed 10 extra minutes every morning to review charts. Dr. Lee often switched shifts after a late night. Dr. Rodriguez needed his first cup of coffee before he could think straight. Small things, but they made the system run smoother than any report with 300 pages. And then came the day I saved an entire emergency case without anyone noticing. A little boy had been in an accident and needed to be taken into surgery immediately. But the only available operating room had been assigned by mistake to a less urgent case. I stood there, looking at the list, and knew that if I did nothing, the boy would wait. So I did what I always do. I hacked the schedule right there on the spot. 3 minutes, one phone call, one line in the system, and the boy was taken into surgery in time. No praise, no questions. But I knew, and the boy survived. Meanwhile, Ethan appeared in every promotional photo, standing next to department heads, smiling like he had designed the entire system himself, talking about innovation and flawless coordination. Funny how every time an operating room crashed, every time the system actually burned, he was busy. Busy in a meeting, busy with a donor, busy having lunch with the board. In other words, he was never there when the work needed him most. I once proposed a training session for coordination, a small class, just enough so people knew what to do if I was not there. I wrote an email, attached diagrams, timelines, and a full 3-month plan. Ethan replied 7 days later with one short line: "No time. Let Olivia handle it. She is used to it." It was the most honest thing he ever said to me, not because it was true, but because it revealed what he truly believed. The system worked because of me, not because of him, and he wanted it to stay that way. But there is something from the past that I will never forget. One evening, when the emergency room was overwhelmed, an elderly woman had to wait 14 hours for a bed. She was cold, tired, and a little scared. I brought extra blankets, warm water, and sat beside her. She asked me, in a shaky voice, what position I held. Why do they let me carry all of this alone? I did not know how to answer, because at that moment I was asking myself the same question. I still remember her eyes, a mix of gratitude and worry. The eyes of someone who had lived long enough to recognize who was suffering for the system and who was benefiting from it. I had been there for 7 years. 7 years keeping everything running like a clock. No one knew I wound every morning. And because of that, when Ethan told me I was not ready, I did not feel hurt. I just felt puzzled. Because a man who had never stood inside a crisis was judging the woman who stood inside one every single day. And that was the moment I knew it was time to stop keeping rhythm for a system that did not know how to say thank you. Not because I wanted revenge, but because if I kept carrying everything the way I had, sooner or later, someone else would pay the price. And next time, there might be no one left to hack the schedule and save them. I thought leaving would be the strongest choice I could make. It turned out it was not. That realization did not arrive in some dramatic explosion. It came on an ordinary afternoon, somewhere between the sound of people calling for drinks and the warm scent of freshly roasted coffee. Life sometimes changes in the moments that do not look like turning points at all. A few weeks before that fateful meeting, I received an email from the Boston hospital system. They wanted to bring me in as the director of patient systems. The salary was higher than anything I had earned before. The authority was clear. The structure was professional, the kind of place where managers were actual managers, not people who said a few pleasant lines and let the entire hospital function on pure momentum. I read their job description and realized every single line matched the work I had been doing for 7 years. The only difference was that no one here called me a director. I had carried that role for years, just without the title and without the authority to fix what needed fixing. That evening, in my small apartment in Queens, I paced back and forth. Then I opened my laptop and wrote my resignation. Wrote it once, edited it once, read it 3 times. On the fourth, I simply hit send. HR replied 2 hours later. They had received my notice and confirmed my final working day. I closed the laptop and felt something slide off my shoulders. Light, as if I had stepped out of a dark room. The only person I told was my mother. She is 72, a retired nurse, and the one person I trust to understand healthcare better than many who still work in it. When she heard I had decided to resign, she stayed silent for 3 seconds. Then she said this: "I am proud. But I hope you are leaving because you want to, not because they pushed you." I have never forgotten that. It stayed in my head like a thin thread tied loosely around my wrist. The day I sent that resignation, I thought I was done. I thought I had chosen the quietest victory possible: to leave a place that did not value me, to choose somewhere better, to start again with the professionalism I deserved. But then the not ready meeting happened. And that afternoon, after walking out of that conference room in silence, I went to a small cafe near the hospital, a quiet place with glass windows facing the street where people always looked like they were racing time. I sat down, ordered a cappuccino, and opened my phone. The HR email was still there, marked in blue, confirming my final day. I stared at that line so long that the coffee went cold without me noticing. And then the emotions came in layers. Bitter. For being dismissed, even though I was the one keeping the hospital standing. Angry. For being used like a spare tire, always expected to patch everyone else's mistakes. And hurt. Because Ethan, my direct manager, did not even know that most of what he bragged about to the board came from my work. Not out of malice, he simply was not interested enough to know. I leaned back in the chair and looked out the window. An ambulance passed by, lights flashing. I knew behind those lights stood a doctor, a nurse, and a system I had held together for 7 years. And I asked myself whether my disappearance would make things better. Probably not. But I knew Ethan would tell a very different story about why I left. I could hear his voice in my head. Calm. Slightly pitying. She was weak. Could not handle the pressure. Not a fit for leadership. I looked back at my computer and suddenly everything became too clear. If I left now, he would win the story. Not win against me. Win the story. And I refused to hand him that. I opened a new email. I did not reread. I did not hesitate. I wrote one single line. I have decided to stay. We need to clarify what is truly not ready. I hit send. A calmness ran down my spine. Not the calm of relief, the calm of knowing you are doing the right thing, even if it will not be easy. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. An email from Ethan. I opened it. In the first 3 seconds, I saw the truth move across his face. Surprise, then worry, then a flicker of panic he thought he was hiding. And finally, like every person afraid of losing power, he forced it into a polite smile. Welcome back. We will discuss further soon. No, we will not discuss it the way you think, I said silently in my mind. Because you do not know the board has already turned, and this time, I am not leaving. I am staying to find out who is truly not ready. When I stopped covering the cracks began to speak. Not in words, but in the ringing of phones, the hurried footsteps in the hallways, and the confused looks of people who had become far too comfortable relying on me. On the first day after I withdrew my resignation, I arrived at the hospital exactly at the time written in my contract. Not a minute early, not a second late. I opened my computer, checked emails strictly within the boundaries of my assigned duties, and did not touch a single task outside my job description. I worked like a human version of the hospital operations manual. No overtime, no checking emails at 8 in the evening, no running through 3 departments to fix something someone forgot, no last-minute crisis patching for coordination failures. Everyone assumed I was obligated to repair, and certainly no cleaning up schedules ruined by someone who misclicked and could not be bothered to fix it. I called that phase, letting the system reveal its own truth. Not to retaliate, but so everyone could finally see what I had seen for 7 years. The signs appeared before noon. A surgery case was double booked. 2 surgeons stood in front of an operating room, not understanding why the system had assigned both their cases to the same hour. The nurse in charge panicked, and the OR coordinator called me asking what was going on. I answered gently that the schedule did not fall under my responsibilities, and they would need to contact the correct department. An hour later, Dr. Turner arrived outside the OR only to find the room unopened, equipment unprepared, and lights off. He looked around and called me out of habit. His voice was close to pleading. Olivia, can you check this for me? I think something is off. I opened the schedule, looked for exactly 25 seconds, and answered in a calm, even tone. Dr. Turner, that room is under the new coordination team today. They will assist you. I heard 4 seconds of silence before he said thank you, the kind of thank you people use when they realize they just lost their only life raft. By late afternoon, an elderly patient had been transferred between floors 3 times because her chart was tagged with the wrong priority. Nurses could not find an available bed because the system had assigned the wrong code. I watched the chaos from my desk. I did not step in. I did not fix it. I simply observed. This was what would continue to happen if no one learned how to operate the system correctly. There was even a small, absurd moment when a young doctor ran straight toward me, hair sticking up like he had sprinted through a storm. He nearly shouted, Olivia, my schedule flipped 3 times in 4 hours. 4 hours. If you ever leave for real, I swear I am quitting medicine. I almost laughed but kept my voice steady. I am still here, doctor, and the schedule is no longer mine to manage. His face froze, and he walked away like he needed oxygen. Ethan was the slowest to notice the shift. He believed the chaos would disappear if he looked stern in a few meetings. But the calls increased, the complaints increased, the emergencies he had to personally handle increased, and soon he started frowning the moment he saw me in the hallway. By the end of the day, he walked up to my desk, arms crossed, using that leadership tone he always relied on when he wanted to pretend he was in control. Olivia, you are being uncooperative. I looked up and smiled. A polite, small smile, enough to let him know I heard the part he did not say out loud. I am cooperating exactly as written. I am simply not cooperating with negligence. I watched his chest rise and fall, a quiet proof that my words landed harder than he expected. Ethan was not used to hearing an answer sharp enough that he could not refute it. That same day, Louise, the head nurse of internal medicine who had been here more than 30 years, found me while I was making tea. She looked at me with a mix of amusement and sympathy. You are doing exactly the right thing. They are just learning a little slow. I let out a small laugh, and for the first time in months, the guilt I carried began to fade. I realized I was not the only one who saw the problem. I was the only one who fixed it. And when I stopped fixing it, people finally saw how frightening it really was. That evening, I left the hospital at 5 sharp, as my contract stated. When I stepped outside, the city was soaked in a warm, golden light, and Manhattan was crowded with people heading home. But what stayed with me was the feeling inside, calm, clear, and a little curious. Curious what would happen when the true keeper of the rhythm stepped back. Curious who would be the first to panic. Curious how Ethan would handle the very thing I had kept steady for 7 years. I was not the one creating the chaos. I simply stopped cleaning it up. And from that day on, every small sound inside the hospital began telling a new truth. Before a system collapses, it always coughs first. In a hospital, a cough is not just a sound, it is a signal, a warning, a compass pointing toward what will happen if people keep ignoring the truth. And only a few days after I stopped patching the world's mistakes, Hudson Central began to cough, a dry, long cough. The first failure appeared on Monday morning. Emergency room wait times had jumped from 45 minutes to 3 hours. I did not need to touch the system to know what had happened. When no one checks each case carefully, the schedules and priorities tangle like old electrical wires in a storage closet. Patients arrive with nowhere to go. Doctors show up with no idea who needs them first. Nurses tighten like drawn strings. I sat at my desk listening to nonstop calls pouring in from the emergency department, and all I felt was a calm understanding. The system was revealing its true self. By that afternoon, 3 surgeries had to be rescheduled. 3. In a major Manhattan hospital, that number sounds like an explosion in a board meeting. One case was assigned to the wrong room. One case overlapped with another, and the third was tagged under the wrong specialty. Mistakes like that used to stop before anyone felt the impact. But now, with no one standing between hundreds of moving parts, everything toppled like rows of dominoes. By the third day, the press stepped in. A local newspaper published a headline that froze the entire hospital. Luxury hospital, service like a bus station. I knew the headline was not entirely fair, but I also knew it was not entirely wrong. In Manhattan, a headline like that spreads faster than a rumor about seeing a celebrity at a diner. The fourth cough was not a system error. It was the arrival of Harriet Monroe. Harriet was one of the hospital's biggest donors. 70 years old, silver hair, steady walk, eyes sharp as a laser. She had been treated for cancer here years ago and considered the hospital her second home. But that day, she was not visiting anyone. She was not offering suggestions. She was here because her mother had been waiting for a temporary bed in the emergency room for 18 hours. I met her in the hallway, where she stood with her arms crossed, staring at the chaos ahead. She asked me one question, soft as wind and heavy as stone. Is this the system I donated to improve? I said nothing, because no matter what I said, she had already seen the truth. Ethan immediately called an emergency meeting. When I walked into the room, he was standing at the head of the table, tie slightly crooked, face tight with stress, but trying to maintain the image of a leader. When the meeting started, he spoke like a man reading lines from a script. The current situation is caused by staff shortages. Then he added another line, and the new doctors are still unfamiliar with the system. A moment later, he listed a third reason. It is winter, everyone gets sick. Patient volume increases naturally. I listened, and it felt like watching a poorly rehearsed comedy. Everyone could see he was trying to patch a hole with cheap tape. Department heads exchanged glances. Harriet sat still, hands clasped, eyes cold as winter water. I waited until Ethan finished. When he sat down, I opened my laptop and began. Wait times increased. That happened exactly as reported in my analysis 2 years ago when I said we needed system training. I switched to the next slide, showing a scan of Ethan's email, the email where he declined the training because he had no time. I continued. In the past 72 hours, the system logged 37 coordination errors. I displayed each one, no emotion, no emphasis, letting the data speak for itself. With every new number, I watched Ethan's shoulders tighten. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes avoiding mine. The room grew so silent we could hear the air conditioning hum. Harriet stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she inhaled slowly and turned to the leadership team. I have been a patient here. I know who keeps this place running and who only keeps the microphone. Her voice was not loud, not sharp, just true. And sometimes the truth alone is enough to make a room hold its breath. I looked at Ethan. He blinked slowly, as if swallowing a slap made of facts. But I felt no triumph, only calm. Because nothing happening was caused by me. I simply stopped cleaning it up. And the system finally spoke the truth everyone had been avoiding for years. In that moment, I knew the cough was only the beginning. The real fever, the real shaking, was still ahead. And no one, not even Ethan, felt confident enough to pretend everything was fine anymore. In that room, for the first time, I saw Ethan not ready. Not the kind of not ready that comes from missing information or forgetting to read a report. It was the kind that arrives when the truth stands right in front of you, knocking with both fists, and you have nowhere left to hide. The meeting was held on Thursday morning in the large conference room on the 7th floor. Normally, that space was used for signing donor contracts or presenting new strategic plans. Today, the atmosphere was completely different. No laughter, no polite greetings, just a thin tension hanging in the air like morning fog. The chief executive officer sat at the head of the table. He was the kind of man who disliked long speeches but enjoyed getting straight to the point. Harriet Monroe sat to his left, arms folded, leaning back slightly in her chair, her eyes sharp as a surgical blade. Ethan sat next to the chief executive officer, his posture unnaturally stiff. I sat across from them, laptop open, calm in a way that felt almost foreign. The chief executive officer went straight to the issue once everyone had settled. We need to understand what is happening with our operational system. The recent incidents are not minor. Ethan drew in a deep breath and slipped into his familiar defensive mode. I have not been adequately supported, he said. The entire system has depended on one person for too long, and when she changed her attitude, the process fell apart. I almost laughed at the phrase that changed her attitude, but my face stayed perfectly still. Ethan continued. I believe Olivia is disrupting the workflow because she is upset about her recent evaluation. She is trying to create pressure to get a higher position. I placed my hand lightly on the touchpad and brought up the first slide. A clean timeline. Clear. Precise. Nothing flashy. Just truth. This is the warning I sent in 2019, I said. I reported the risk of system overload if we did not implement training. This is Ethan's reply, declining the proposal. I switched to the second slide. Here are the 5 training proposals I submitted, each with a 3-month plan. All 5 were rejected. The air in the room thickened. Ethan tried to keep his expression steady, but I noticed his hand tighten slightly on the table. I moved to the final slide, where the numbers were displayed plainly. And here is the actual data from the past 72 hours. 3-hour wait times, 3 surgeries rescheduled, 37 coordination errors, not caused by me, caused by a system without a second person who knows how to operate it. Data does not bend. Harriet looked at the screen, then at the chief executive officer, then at Ethan. Her gaze was soft as a breeze, but strong enough to make anyone step back without moving an inch. Ethan suddenly leaned forward. His voice rose, strained at the edges. She is leveraging this crisis to grab a seat. That is obvious. No one doing their job would just stop like this unless there was a personal motive. I rotated the laptop half closed toward myself, then looked up. I smiled, not wide, not sharp, just enough to show I was not stepping into his emotional script. If I wanted a seat, I would have gone to Boston for a better salary. I stayed so you would not get to tell the wrong story. The sentence landed on the conference table light as mist, but cold as metal. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. Harriet clasped her hands and leaned forward slightly. She is right. She faced the chief executive officer and spoke in a firm, even tone. We have relied on one person for 7 years. One person without formal authority to correct errors, yet responsible for fixing every error. No one should have to carry an entire system alone. The chief executive officer stayed silent for a few seconds, the kind of silence that tells you he is thinking deeply, not hesitating. Finally, he spoke. Olivia, your report shows that you understand this system better than anyone here. Nothing in the data indicates you are not ready, but I see many things that indicate we were not ready. His eyes shifted to Ethan, especially at the mid-management level. Ethan froze. His shoulders sank just a fraction. No one voiced it out loud, but everyone understood. The person not ready was not me. I felt no gloating, no sense of revenge, only something very simple. The system was finally looking at itself. The meeting ended with the chief executive officer requesting everyone to review their processes and asking me to stay to support a full assessment. I packed up my laptop, stood, and for the first time in years, walked out of a conference room without feeling like anyone was shrinking my sense of competence. As I reached the door, I glanced at Ethan. He turned away, trying to straighten his tie, but the slight tremble in his hands revealed everything he was trying to hide. It was never that I was not ready. It was that he never imagined what would happen when I stopped holding the entire system still. And for the first time, Ethan understood that clearly. You do not need to replace everyone. You only need to replace the way things run. That was my first thought when the next day's meeting began, a smaller meeting, more private and more important than any meeting I had walked into in 7 years. The chief executive officer invited me into his office, where light from the window fell across a large walnut desk. There were only 3 people in the room. The chief executive officer, Harriet Monroe, and I, Ethan, were not there. Because of that, the room felt so quiet I could hear the wall clock marking each second. The chief executive officer did not circle the subject. He clasped his hands and looked directly at me. Olivia, I want to offer you the position of Vice President of Patient Systems. You would report directly to me. I did not react right away. Not because I was shocked, but because I had learned to keep my expression steady when people expected me to waver. He continued, twice your current salary, full authority to build your own team, and you will oversee system training across the entire hospital. I saw Harriet give a small nod as if she had been the one pushing this proposal forward. Her look carried neither pity nor favoritism. It was the look of someone who had lived long enough to know who was actually doing the work and who was only pretending. A moment later, the chief executive officer placed a sheet of paper on the desk. You will also have the authority to decline any request that does not meet operational standards, including requests from Ethan. The room fell silent for a few beats. I could guess the chief executive officer expected me to say yes immediately. Anyone in my place would have said yes immediately. But I was not anyone. I drew in a slow breath. Thank you, but I cannot accept right away. The chief executive officer looked slightly surprised. Harriet raised an eyebrow, as if waiting to hear the condition I had in mind. I knew what was in front of me: power, title, recognition. But there was something I needed to clarify before stepping into any higher role. I placed my hand on the desk and met the chief executive officer's eyes. I have only one condition. He motioned for me to continue. I do not want this to become a public execution. I want to reform the system, not get revenge. The words fell into the room like a drop into a still lake. Harriet looked at me with a warmth I had not expected, as if she recognized a younger version of herself standing where I stood. The chief executive officer tilted his head slightly. You are concerned about creating internal tension. I nodded. I want people to understand that this change is to fix the system, not to eliminate anyone. If I walk in on the first day with the energy of someone who wants to win against someone else, I will not fix anything that lasts. I stopped looking at him and turned to Harriet. She understood. And once she understood, she spoke for me. She is right. Reform built on fear lasts only until people forget to be afraid. Reform built on respect lasts much longer. The chief executive officer stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. I agree. No public discipline for Ethan. No scandal. We will change the structure, not the people, unless we are forced to. I exhaled quietly. A breath I had not noticed I had been holding. The condition was set. The chief executive officer smiled and extended his hand. Welcome to your new role, Olivia. I shook his hand, but I knew there was one thing I had to do before accepting the title. Something personal, but necessary. I left the office and walked straight to the sixth floor. Ethan's door was slightly open. He stood beside his desk, staring at the screen as if trying to pick up the last pieces of authority he had dropped. I tapped lightly on the doorframe. He looked up. His eyes shifted through three stages: alertness, annoyance, and finally something close to resignation. I stepped inside. I did not sit. I did not soften the moment. I stood at a distance that made the conversation impossible to misinterpret. I said, You told me I was not ready. Ethan did not move. I went on. You were right. I was not ready. I was not ready to stay silent forever. The room went still. I could see him searching for a response, but no words came. There was no excuse strong enough to cover what the truth had already revealed. I turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind me as a reminder. I was not there to corner anyone. I was there to open a new way of running things. I was not there to win over a person. I was there to win over old habits. As I headed toward the elevator, I felt the change settling in around me. Not just my title, not just my authority, but the rules themselves. A new set of rules that I would be writing line by line. In the end, the people who had been invisible were finally called by their true names. I never thought my story would lead to that moment, but 6 months after I stepped into my new role, Hudson Central had changed so much that even I had to pause sometimes to make sure I was still in the same place where I had once worked. I started by building my own team, 3 people. I did not want a large team because I believed in quality over quantity, and because the people who are truly right for the job are rarely the ones standing in front waving for attention. The first person I chose was Louise, a veteran nurse of 30 years. She had the memory of a living archive and the patience of someone who had seen every version of chaos this hospital could create. When I asked her to join, she laughed and said she had been waiting for that question, since the days when I did not even know how to make a proper cup of coffee. The second was Jonah, a young data engineer, only 3 years out of school, but sharp in a way very few people are. He looked at systems not as lifeless tables, but as flows that could be improved, reshaped, and predicted. When I asked why he wanted to join, Jonah simply said, I want to work in a place where data is not hidden because someone is afraid of the truth. The last was Maya, a nurse so skilled with spreadsheets that people used to call her the spreadsheet girl. Everyone relied on her to fix forms, merge files, and organize numbers, but no one thought those skills mattered. I did. People who understand details are the ones who keep a system upright. When I offered her the role, her eyes turned a little red, as if it was the first time someone had truly seen her capability. 3 people, 3 perfect pieces for rebuilding the hospital's entire operational machine. We began with the new training program, not the dull meetings people attended just to check their names off a list. This was a program that required every department head and every mid-level manager to understand each step of the coordination system. No more sighing and saying, let Olivia handle it. No more shoving problems my way and waiting for me to clean them up. I designed each session like a map, starting with patient flow, then bed allocation, then surgical scheduling, then risk anticipation. Louise handled real-world practice. Jonah handled data analysis. Maya guided the technical steps. Every department had to participate. Some frowned at the amount of information, but they needed it, and they learned. The results came faster than I expected. After 6 months, emergency room wait times dropped to 30 minutes. When the press heard that number, they thought we were exaggerating. But it was real. Jonah once said that if the system was operated correctly, wait time was only a small variable, and he was right. Surgical cases were no longer rescheduled at the last minute. That alone made surgeons breathe easier than any improvement before. There is nothing more frustrating than preparing for a case only to be told the room is not ready. Nurses experienced less burnout. This was the part that made me happiest. A year earlier, I had seen so many young nurses with eyes dull from exhaustion. Now, they worked with more clarity, carried less burden, and no longer ran around cleaning up other people's mistakes. The press returned, but this time, not to mock us. A respected medical journal published a piece praising the hospital's system reform. The headline was no longer a bus station, it was a model that other major hospitals should study. As for Ethan, he was still there, still the director of clinical operations, but quieter, more careful, and more human. I did not take his role. I did not embarrass him publicly. I did not need to. Real change does not need applause. One day, Ethan came to my office, standing at the doorway like someone unsure whether he deserved to enter. In the end, he said only one short sentence: "I want to learn the system from the beginning." I looked at him for a few seconds and nodded. There is no victory more satisfying than watching someone who once dismissed you finally learn to respect the work itself. Not revenge, just a correction. After he left, Louise looked at me and smiled. "You were right. You do not need to tear anyone down. You just need people to see exactly where they stand." And I thought she might be right. 6 months earlier, I believed I was simply trying not to get caught in the spiral of retaliation. But it turned out that when you stand firmly on the side of truth, the entire system begins to shift back into alignment. Now, when I walk through the hospital halls, I see people who had once been invisible finally recognized. I see Maya being asked by physicians for scheduling insight. I see Jonah consulted by department heads for data interpretation. I see Louise teaching young nurses with quiet pride. And me, I walk a little slower to take it all in. The heaviness of 7 years is gone. The feeling of holding the entire system on my shoulders is gone. Now I am simply the person keeping time, but it is the rhythm of a system that has learned to stand, breathe, and correct itself. And that is when I realized something. Power is not about where you stand on an organizational chart. It is about whether you can help people see their own true capability and the capability of the system itself without ever needing to raise your voice. People ask if I regret not walking away. I just smile, because if I had left, they never would have known the truth. 3 weeks after the meeting that shifted the entire wind of the hospital, I went back to Queens to visit my mother. Not because I needed advice. I had already moved past needing anyone to tell me whether I was right or wrong. I just wanted to see the small kitchen where my whole life began, the place where my mother returned from night shifts, still smelling of antiseptic, the ticking of the old wall clock, marking the rhythm of a woman holding a family together through sheer endurance. She was sitting at the old wooden table where she often checked prescriptions for neighbors who asked for her help. Every time I came home, she always looked up slowly, as if she wanted to memorize the moment, to see whether I was still the daughter she once raised or had become a sharper, quieter version of myself. "You have lost weight," my mother said, not as a criticism, but as a way of acknowledging I had lived through more than I admitted. "I am fine," I answered, setting my bag on the floor and opening the window so the afternoon light could spill in. Queens in the late day has a kind of old golden glow that Manhattan never carries. Softer, slower, like an elder telling a long story. We drank tea, the same kind she brewed back when I was an intern, amber-colored, with a bite of bitterness in the first sip that softened into sweetness later. Just like the life she lived. Just like the life I was living. "You did well," she said after I finished telling her about the meeting, the promotion offer, Ethan sitting there half admitting, half swallowing what he could not deny. I laughed under my breath. "I did not stay to win against anyone. No," she said as she set her cup down. "You stayed because you are my daughter." I looked at her, not because the words were strange, but because of the calm certainty in her voice. She leaned back, her eyes drifting as though she was reopening an old door. "When I was young," she began, "the male doctors looked down on me constantly. Being a nurse was not easy. Being a nurse who dared to speak up was even harder. Every time I presented a patient case, they questioned me like I knew nothing. One night, I warned a doctor on call that a patient was heading toward a crisis. He said not to overreact. 40 minutes later, the patient went into cardiac arrest. I saved them. He stood there pale, unable to speak. I felt something tug at my chest as I listened. My mother had never told me this, but I understood why. People who have learned to carry weight do not often recount the moments they were underestimated. They are too busy surviving the next one. I wanted to do what you did, she said slowly. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to speak. I wanted to point out the cracks everyone pretended not to see. But my time was different. I stayed quiet to keep my job, to raise you. She looked straight at me, her eyes kind but sharp, like a surgeon's blade, revealing the truth beneath the tissue. You did what my generation wished we had the strength to do. Those words did not feel like praise. They felt like the last missing piece clicking into place. I realized I had not stood up just for myself. I had stood up for every woman who once had to bow her head in rooms she understood better than anyone else. I braced my hand on the table. Sometimes I think leaving would have been the smart choice. Yes, she nodded. Leaving when there is nothing left to learn or give is wise. Then she tilted her head, studying me as if she could see past skin, past fabric, past the silence I used to mask my exhaustion. But sometimes staying and holding up a mirror to the truth is far stronger. I said nothing. I did not need to. My mother understood me the way people who spend a lifetime in hospitals understand the slightest irregular heartbeat before the patient feels it. We cleaned the table, then I stepped onto the front porch to watch people passing by. The breeze carried the warm dust and sunlight that only Queens seems to own. I watched strangers come and go and thought about the hospital, the place I had lived inside for so long that even its smallest sounds were familiar. The squeak of a rolling bed, the steady beeping of heart monitors, the sharp footsteps of a doctor when an emergency call came through. I looked at all of it with a new kind of quiet. I did not stay to win. I did not stay to prove who was right or wrong. I stayed so no one would be dismissed the way I once was. That is not victory. It is a duty. A duty I only understood fully when I looked at my mother, a woman who endured what I was lucky enough to face head on. When I drove back into Manhattan that night, the lights from the high rises reflected in my windshield like soft cuts across water. The city seemed to ask me the same question everyone else had asked. Do you regret it? No, because if I had left, they never would have known the truth. And more than that, if I had left, the next person might have had to endure what a single honest sentence, a single honest action, could have stopped. If this story reminds you of the moment someone once told you that you were not ready, leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you like stories that stay calm but cut sharp as a fresh scalpel in an operating room, subscribe. I post every week, the real stories most people live through but rarely tell. See you in the next video.